everybody, and welcome to the show. Today, we are discussing charter schools and their enemies. Jacob, what is going on?
This was a good book, Ruben. When I say good book, it had a lot of information, and like half the book has statistics. So charter schools. I mean, I guess should we let the audience know? They probably know already that you work for a charter school, right?
Before we get into the book, I do work for a charter school, but before we get into the nuts and bolts of the book,
Right.
why did you came to me with this topic? Why?
I'm trying to remember. It's been a few weeks now because we read the book. It took us a couple weeks to get through it. I'm thinking it because I'm trying to remember what the original. It might have been based on an article or something that came up regarding school. Oh, I know it was school choice. That's what it was, and how that's a big issue right now, of course, across the country. And I'm not sure if people understand it as well as they might think, or maybe they go ahead and look at their political leaders and they go ahead and say, you know what, you guys know more about it, and we support you, and because your leaders support it, then or against a school choice, then I'll be against school choice. But I really believe, Ruben,
I couldn't follow what you just said.
I said that I believe that people out there, they don't know too much about this topic, maybe, or maybe they do. I mean, it'd be interesting to get some input. And I think sometimes people will go ahead and defer to their political leaders regarding this topic, because it could get a little in the weeds regarding what we're talking about. Are we talking about charter schools? Are we talking about home schools? Are we talking about all of them? I know today we're talking specific about charter schools, but I think truly, I believe that I think a lot of times people haven't done the homework to really study these different types of schools and what they offer. And the whole school choice movement, I think, hasn't really been communicated to us. You know, I remember, Ruben, back in 2008, I believe, Condoleezza Rice once said that she believed the next civil rights issue is in education. It's education. And I think she was right. Ruben, with Condoleezza Rice and her sharing that, I really believe that this topic is just, it's like it's an infancy, even though, for example, charter schools have been around for what, 30 years or close to that. I think that this time period is ripe for this discussion regarding school choice, and specifically today where we talk about charter schools. I think that this is a good debate. This is a good discussion, and I hope
you mentioned
want to discuss it.
You mentioned the Condoleezza Rice and her statement about civil rights. So as I started reading this book, so Thomas Sowell is a 90-something-year-old, I would say, social scientist. He's written books on economics. He's written books on
Economists,
culture and all kinds of topics related to social science. And here he takes aim at charter school enemies. So there is his bias, of course, in favor of charter schools, but he gives some reasons, and you can infer when you start reading it. He makes a claim. He doesn't say this directly, but he points out that white students and Asian students seem to be enrolled in better schools. There seems to be some type of privilege for whatever reason, not pointing the finger at white students or Asians, but for whatever reason or reasons, they seem to be in better schools. And you almost can infer him saying, well, now we have a leveling of the playing field, and that is charter schools. He doesn't say that directly, but he kind of infers it. Right. Would you agree with that analysis?
Yeah, I think so. I think he is, and then and then he goes and he discusses even the who's going to charter schools and who's going. I didn't know this, Ruben, that there are more white kids and Asian kids who go to public schools than charter schools. But after reading it, it made sense And then he goes more into why and all that. But I thought that was interesting, and that might be one reason why people don't like it so much. But that's we can talk more about that.
Well, this title, Charter Schools and Their Enemies, Mr. Sowell takes aim at the enemies of charter schools. And the enemies seem to be centered around two groups: the public schools, that's an obvious one, and the teachers' unions, not so obvious, but he makes a claim as to why. And I guess the question then becomes, isn't it true that there are numerous studies on the performance of students who go to charter schools, often outperforming students at public schools? If you make maybe direct comparisons, maybe the similar areas, and he mentions schools like KIPP and things like that. Before we get into the weeds of that, I will like to say that if you open the book, there's an appendix, pages after pages in this appendix of studies,
Statistics and so forth. Yeah.
Studies over statistics over the performance of X school versus Y school, charter schools versus public schools, and things like that. Don't you agree with me, though, that if people's minds are made up about charter schools, and we got the glare, then their minds are made up. There's not a whole lot we can do with data, although you can point out the data. What is the antagonism against charter schools?
I think it's all about information that we get. Where are we getting this information? And you mentioned who are the two antagonists against it? It's the schools and the unions. I would add a lot of politicians as well. Maybe they connect with the unions, of course. And so I think because over the years, Ruben, I remember this discussion. I remember in the 90s when public charter schools were being talked about and how horrible they were and how they were they're going to do wrong regarding their finances and take advantage of the system and so forth. And to be truthful, there's some bad charter schools out there, and he mentions it as well. But overall, why? And you ask that question, why are people so against it? And I think it has to do with the media. It has to do with the information that we're getting. Not too many people want to go look at an appendix and look at statistics and look at schools and comparing them, because he even talks about that room and goes, sometimes they look at the wrong statistics, meaning they'll look at just charter schools as a whole regarding public schools. Oh, they're about the same. Well, yeah, but you're not looking at the specific groups of people that we're looking for, those of color, Latinos and African Americans. When you look at those and when you look at them compared to schools at the same location, same grade levels, then you see a disparity. Then you see a big disparity. You'll see the charter schools totally outdo the public schools. And isn't it interesting, Ruben, that it's the parents who continue wanting their kids to go to these charter schools? That's one thing that wasn't talked about, but I think that's a discussion point. Why are so many people wanting to get on waiting lists to get to these schools if they're so awful, right? And so, I teach at a public school, and I'm gonna be honest with you, Ruben. I know that one of the issues is jobs, and people don't want to say it out loud, but hey, I want my job. I want to keep it. And I know that if charter schools are allowed to continue to grow, although I think California, and he talks about it towards the end of the book, how California has done so much to squash charter schools internally and externally, that I think that it's a big uphill battle for charter schools in California, especially with this governor we have. And so that being said, you know what? What does the future lay for this? And I don't think the future is too positive if we continue just to hear that dogma, unless we look at the statistics.
I don't agree with that last statement, but before we
tell me why.
I do want to mention why, but before we do, you just said something about, wow, we like our jobs. I like my job.
I'm sorry. Yes.
I just want to. I don't think a lot of people understand what you're alluding to, but perhaps you're alluding to that. If you're at a public school, you have greater chance or greater access to tenure if you're a teacher with a certain amount of years. Of course, is that what you're referring to?
That was a big part of it, correct. And in
the charter school system, it doesn't quite have that kind of structure in which you have a job for life.
Correct.
If you, okay.
Correct.
So, and even you've admitted on this podcast, and I think you just did again, that, hey, it's you find comfort in your job because you know you'll have it.
Yeah, but is that it's okay? I think it's okay for unions to and I think the only difference is they need to be honest. I think it's okay for them to protect my job and to fight for it and all that. That's what they're there for. But they're not there for children. Unions are not there for not teacher unions. They're there for teachers. But that's when we get a little dishonest when we say, oh, they're really there for they're not there for the children, because if they were, they would handle example, charter schools, they would handle them differently, right?
You're saying that the unions are there for the paying
teachers,
members of the union, which
yes,
are teachers, and they're not there for the students specifically.
Yeah.
They're there for, and then there's a quote in the book where some union president at one point says, once students start paying dues, then we will be there for them.
Right.
In fairness, though, not all teachers feel that in the union. And perhaps they feel, by extension, by being in the union, they're feel helping kids. They are serving students.
Sure.
Now, Sowell would argue, no, you are hurting students by being in this union because the unions fight the charters. Would you agree with that?
For sure. Yeah, he would say that they fight them, and I'm not sure if he would say you need to get out of it. I think it's such a big dinosaur to fight, but he would say, what's the problem? Because that's his title, right? And they're enemies. What's the problem?
And that's the union. Say you need to get out of it. I don't know what you mean.
I mean, he wouldn't say. I mean, I don't think he offers a solution to teachers who are already in a union. I mean, you can't get, I don't think that was the thesis of his book or his. That wasn't his concern. His concern is charter schools.
He's not asking you to quit your job. Of course not. Yeah.
Right. But so I'll look at myself. I'm in a situation where, hey, I'm teaching at a public school. I love my job, and I know that there's good teachers there. There's good programs. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't want or shouldn't allow someone like you to be able to teach at a charter school.
That's the message. That's what he's
trying to. That's what he's
So for those wondering, well, what is the claim here in terms of why charters perform better? Again, I feel like this is the kind of topic where people have made up their minds already. And although I will point out a couple of claims that he makes. My experience with charter schools has been very positive. And, for those of you who think that charter schools don't pay their teachers well or don't support their teachers, I'm here as a living testament to say false, very false. You have to it just depends on the charter. Of course, I feel very lucky and blessed to be at mine, but I don't want to give too much personal because we are reviewing a book, but not all charters are the same. And he points that out too, in terms of some charters perform poorly. And then you got to deal with those as they come. I do want to mention the reasons as to why charters perform well. According to Sowell, he mentions accountability first, accountability of teacher and accountability to the test. So he mentions these high stakes tests that measure student learning, that sort of demonstrate how a school is doing. And by way of opposition, he quotes Diane Ravitch as saying, test scores should remain a private matter between parents and teachers. And that this kind of test quashes imagination, creativity, and divergent thinking. So what would you say to that, Jacob?
Well, I think it's silly to say that, we got to keep these test scores private. That's all. I think that too, Ruben. When we get towards that end of the year or April, we use the April window when tests are about to be administered. Everybody looks at how important it is, and it's communicated to the parents, communicated to the students. Why not communicate that to the community? Why not communicate that to the city? Because everyone else is understanding this is a very high stake test, And also, I think what happens, especially since COVID, I think people are starting to downplay the test. Like, wait a minute, it's not that important, and they're even changing some teaching strategies and so forth because they want to make sure that they do very well in these exams that are coming up, these state exams. But no, I think Ruben, I would have to say, yeah. I mean, I think this is very silly to say it's only for parent and teacher and student. No, I think it has to be open up to the public, because that's where public scrutiny comes. That's where you say, hey, how is this school doing versus a charter school? And we saw that the book deals with these New York schools, that it was very, even the worst, it's funny, Ruben, even the worst charter schools in New York City did better than the public schools, which tells you something. So, I mean, and they released their scores, but nobody wants to talk. What happens is they don't want to talk about the scores. They want to talk about the negativities that they see about charter schools.
I agree that tests are critical in measuring student learning. I mean, how else are you going to do it? And we need to peek in. Not only do I believe that, I also think we need to make smaller stakes tests, teacher-made tests available to parents. Assessment needs to be going on all the time.
Sure.
But I guess as I was reading this, I don't want to go too far afield, but I had this question come up as it has in the past of, why don't we teach to the test? I keep hearing not to. I've always heard not to. And then I just, so the idea of there's a test coming, state test, could be in science, could be in English, math, depending on your grade, and things. And of course, it's a measure of the student and of the school-wide. But we've all been taught, you've heard that before, Jake, right? You shouldn't teach to the test.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I know they say that, but then they say, make sure they're ready for the test by basically by you teaching to it. But it's kind of there's a message being shared out loud, but internally people are saying, no, we need to teach the test.
Well, what's wrong with teaching to the test?
I don't think there's anything wrong with teaching the test. If that's what you're looking at, if you're looking at that as to say, hey, this is where my kids are at, why is there anything wrong with that? I don't have any problem with that. I think people have, what happens, Ruben, is you have 8 months of schooling. And I think the thinking is that, hey, there's other things to teach. Why focus on the test? But the reality is, if it's a good assessment, and that's another question, that's another dialogue or a debate for another day. Are these assessments really truly showing where our kids are at? But if they truly are, why not work with them starting the beginning of the year? And a lot of teachers do that. They say, okay, I'm getting tested in April. The kids are getting tested in April. I'm going to get them ready.
Yeah, but it can't just be a teacher decision. It has to be a cultural school-wide decision, because
you're right.
Because administrators, administrators intentionally don't tell teachers that the test is coming. Hey, this is what's going to be on the state test. Look at this. They don't do that. Maybe they should. And the reason I say that is because I know what the answer is going to be. I'm a teacher. I get it. The answer is going to be, it's going to stifle your creativity. It's going to it's going to put you in a box. I understand all that. But if it has such serious consequences, I think if teachers understood that, maybe they don't understand that.
No, I think, to be fair though,
books are going to be written about this.
Yeah,
I think even the public school teachers are going to say, let's teach to the test. We don't want to be the subject of Thomas Sowell anymore.
I think, to be fair, I think it's happening
for Superman. We want to pass this dang test.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be fair, regarding the test itself, not charter school, but the test itself, I think, because we only teach at a couple of schools, right? I think there are schools. I've talked to other teachers where they say, yeah, we definitely focus on that test. So I think that's starting to become apparent that, hey, this holds weight. And maybe eventually, Ruben, because I'm not sure how you feel, I think what I'm getting is, and maybe I'm wrong, you correct me, is that I feel like a little defeated, at least in this state, regarding charter schools. But I think in other areas of the country, I think there's more hope. And because of that, there being more hope, maybe he
alludes
to that at the end of the film.
He mentions that there are several states and major cities, he calls them whose whole educational ecosystem, the way he uses it, educational ecosystems have changed from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And he mentions Florida, Arizona, I'm forgetting another one, and the cities of Boston, New York, and LA. And
Right.
so, yes, I agree with you. As recently as 2019, Gavin Newsom passed a law that made it very hard for, or challenged, allowed it to allow the state to really challenge charter schools. I forget the language, make it harder for them to open up schools. I know at our school, to be very, very direct, we've outgrown our school. We have almost 5,000 students. And
do you guys take like applications, like a lot of charters?
Oh. Yes.
And
so
we have 5,000
students that, so we're in Granada Hills, which is right in Northridge. We have students coming in from Palmdale, which that has to be 35, 40 minutes from Granada Hills at least. We have students from Panorama City, outside of our district. We have a little lottery system, and we accept people who are not in our district. We don't even let our teachers bring their kids unless they're the lottery or they're in the vicinity. So district. So yeah, we're very by the book. But the point is that LAUSD, from my understanding, not allow us to grow, to leave. We have to stay in this 100-year-old facility, and we're married to it, and that's it.
That sounds about right.
They make it very difficult for us. But to your point that it's bleak, I think you're right. They're trying to shut it down, but they're being unsuccessful. They challenged de Blasio in New York, including, by the way, this is not necessarily a right-left issue.
No, I don't think so.
More people on the right are in favor of charter schools. But there's enough on the left who are in favor of charter schools. In particular, certain ones that are meeting the needs of low-income students in LA, New York City. So, but
yeah, can I share something though, Ruben? I mean, because I was thinking about this last night. He goes towards the end of the book. He deals with what are some of the reasons why the people who are the enemies of the charter school. What are some of their concerns, right? And one of them, of course, is that they're saying, hey, you know what, racially, it's mostly only Black and Latino kids, and it's not fair. I mean, they should be amongst other, groups of people, whites and so forth, Asians. And obviously, the answer is that, hey, a lot of the data that was taken was from the same schools of the public schools that were predominantly Black, But it's like when it's easy to point the finger at the charter because, hey, you're pointing it at them. But if you look at yourself, say, oh, we do the same thing, but that's the charter shouldn't be doing it, right? So he talked about that. And then, you know what? There's one thing though, Ruben, that he didn't mention, but that I hear a lot from people is that, and I'm not sure why he didn't mention, maybe because it's not a big reason, but to him, but it has to do with unions. That the concern for a lot of people I work with, I've heard people say this, is that the charters don't have unions. And because they don't have unions, that makes it they're worried about teachers being protected and so forth. Now, again, going back to the students, it's not really about the students, it's about the teachers, which they would probably say, well, if the teachers aren't protected, then they're not going to be great educators or so forth. But that is something that is brought up quite a bit. He didn't bring that piece up. He obviously brought some other things as well. Escaping my memory right now. But that was something I think is going to be brought up again and again, that people are concerned. I think, but to be fair, though, I think at your school, you do have a union, correct? So there are charter schools that have them.
Yes.
Okay. So.
Yeah. And I would be surprised. Yeah. Now I'm going to speak out of knowledge. So
okay.
I'd be surprised if there wasn't some kind of protection for Green Dot and KIP. I'm for protection of teachers, of course.
Right.
An admin, just because they're administrators doesn't mean they're right. We talked about admin and the problems that they could, some of the bias. We did a video on admin, and so I'm not sitting here saying, hey, admin's always right. At my school, admin has let some teachers go who haven't had tenure, so we can get tenure at our school. It's not maybe as easy, okay, where you're there for 3 or 4 years. I don't know. I don't want to speak about your school or anything or how it generally goes.
Sure.
But it's pretty rigorous, and I will say that it's hard to see teachers go. And I don't always agree maybe with the decisions, but they see things I don't see. But I
I
agree
guess
with that idea of protections over, and just oversight. That's
right.
important. That admin needs to be held accountable too.
Sure. That's a good point. They do. And to be fair, when you're sharing, I just thought, you know what, it is kind of sad or unfair that you guys are charter schools are actually have a lot more pressure on them because they have to, they have to show that they're growing, that they're actually doing well. And if not, then all eyes are going to be on them. So your school, if things are not going well, then hey, we might have to let go some people because we have a higher hill to climb than the regular public school does. So in a way, of course, it's not fair. I mean, in the book,
don't know that.
What's that?
Go on.
No, I'm saying though, in his book, he talks about also he talks about that schools. One of their fears, like let's say a school like mine, would be that a lot of our students are going to, let's say, your school, right? Going and that you're going to be taking that money because those kids are money, and that that's going to deplete us. But the reality is that we still get the same amount of money per child. And he mentions that in charter schools, they actually nationwide average like 28% less. I didn't know that. And so we're not losing money. It's just that we're losing kids who are going to a school, let's say like yours, who may not get the same amount of money per child as we do. But hey, it's that's where we go back to parent choice. And do parents have that right to be able to choose? That's what going back to Condoleezza Rice when she said, "Hey, this is the next civil rights issue," because hey, shouldn't we want all our kids to have the same equal access to education? Why do only the white kids get to go to private schools and the Asian kids get to go to all these great schools? Why can't Latinos and blacks have that choice? No one wants to talk about that. This is a very racial thing. This is
so would say that they can access better education, maybe not through private, but they should be able to at least choose. Parents should choose between that public school and
through just charter schools,
available to them. Do want to mention before we close that you mentioned oversight in terms of, you had mentioned the idea of what charter schools deal with in terms of pressure, but the oversight is dealing not only with LAUSD, because my charter school is an LAUSD charter, meaning it's in the jurisdiction of LAUSD. So I believe they do some scrutiny of us. I know in my last charter school that I used to work at, they definitely did. So we had their oversight, plus we had a state charter oversight. So we were getting in, what's the word I'm looking for?
That doesn't even seem fair that the ones who don't want you.
When the IRS goes in, what do we call when the IRS goes in and looks at your books?
They do an audit.
Yeah, we were getting audited by the charter, by LAUSD.
Yeah,
but some people think we don't, and that's why I say there's nothing that we could say.
There's more scrutiny. There's more scrutiny.
I could say that would some people just have a bias against it, and there's nothing I could say. I remember when I was telling somebody, maybe we'll end it on this little story. I was talking to a couple who were telling me how much. What do I do for a living? And I said, I'm a teacher. And they said, oh, you what school? And I said, Granada Hills Charter. And they said, oh, they don't allow special ed students at charters. And I said, that's strange because I have 15 students on my caseload because I also teach special ed. No, he told me, no, that's not true.
I refuse to believe that.
That's not true. What do you mean that's not true? And then I said, why am I going to get upset over this, over somebody whose mind is made up, And I did, and I just said, oh, okay, maybe you're right.
But Ruben, aren't we doing this for the people whose minds aren't made up? Hopefully, there are people out there who say, hey, let's look at this a little different angle here. Let's read Thomas Sowell's book.
I think, one way is to read Thomas Sowell's book. One way is to listen to Pod and Deliver. Thank you, everybody, for checking it out. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.